They thought she was just another child hustling on a cold New York sidewalk, clutching a box of homemade candy to survive the day. But when the billionaire CEO bent down to buy a piece, the photograph she showed him shattered his world and set into motion a story that would heal 3 broken lives and countless hearts beyond. If stories of hope, healing, and second chances move you, please subscribe so you won't miss the journey to the very last chapter. The sky over Lower East Side was a flat sheet of gray that morning, heavy with the smell of damp brick and exhaust. Orchard Street still bore the bones of its immigrant past. Narrow tenements leaning shoulder to shoulder, faded awnings flapping in the wind, store windows filled with cheap shoes and discount coats. The city moved briskly, people clutching paper cups of coffee as they hurried to subways and jobs. But on the corner of Orchard and Rivington, time seemed to slow around one child. Ivy Monroe was only 6 years old, and far too small for the burden she carried. She stood beside a battered milk crate, her breath making pale clouds in the frosty air. Balanced atop the crate was a cardboard sign, letters uneven and wobbly. "Help my mom's surgery." In her mittened hands, she clutched a paper bag filled with candy bars she had wrapped herself, simple squares of peanut butter fudge pressed into wax paper and tied with red yarn. She had rehearsed her line carefully, the way her mother had once taught her to introduce herself at school. Clear voice, polite smile. 3 bars for $5, she whispered to passers-by. Most walked past without glancing down. Some shook their heads. Others muttered that the city was full of scams. Ivy kept smiling anyway, though her toes were numb inside her sneakers. Down the block, a tall man in a navy wool coat slowed his stride. Ethan Hartley was 38, CEO of Hartley Capital, one of Manhattan's most aggressive investment funds in the digital infrastructure space. On paper, he commanded billions. But on certain mornings, Ethan forced himself out of his glass tower to walk these streets. He called it his walk-along, a ritual inherited from his father, who believed that a man who moved money without touching reality would eventually lose both. This morning, though, Ethan almost walked past the girl. He had 3 calls waiting and a board presentation later in the day. Then her sign caught his eye. He paused, studying the child, her thin arms holding out the candy like an offering she desperately needed someone to accept. Something in her gaze, wide, hopeful, trembling, made him stop. "How much for the bag?" His voice was low, steady, trained by years of boardroom precision. Ivy looked up, startled, then straightened her back the way children do when they want to be taken seriously. 3 for $5, sir." Ethan reached into his wallet and handed her a crisp 100. "I'll take them all." For a heartbeat, Ivy's eyes widened with joy, then quickly dimmed. She shook her head with surprising firmness. "No, sir, you can't buy them all. If you do, I won't have anything left to sell the others. Mom says I have to keep trying." That answer jolted him more than the sign itself. Ethan tucked the bill into her mitten, ignoring her protest, and handed the candy back. "Then sell them again. Double your market," he said, almost smiling. Ivy tilted her head, puzzled by the strange phrase. Then she fished a small photo from her pocket. It was creased and worn from too many days in a child's hands. "Do you want to see my mom? This is her. She's sick, but she's beautiful." Ethan took the photo casually and froze. The woman's face, pale but unmistakable, stared back at him. Claire Monroe. 7 years had passed since Ethan last saw her. 7 years since an unanswered message had closed a door he had never truly understood. He had buried the memory under layers of work and ambition, convincing himself she had chosen to vanish. But here she was, alive in a crumpled photograph, sick and struggling, her daughter selling candy to pay for her care. The child was still speaking, her words tumbling in the cold air. "She couldn't sleep last night. She was breathing funny. Sometimes she turns blue." Ethan's chest tightened. He crouched so his eyes were level with hers. "What's your name?" Ivy. Ivy Monroe. The surname hit him like another blow. He glanced again at the photograph, then at the girl's face, the same hazel eyes, the curve of cheek he remembered in Claire. His pulse hammered in his ears. "Can you take me to her?" he asked softly. Ivy hesitated. Her mother had warned her never to let strangers into their home, but there was something steady in his voice, something that reminded her of the way doctors spoke when they meant to fix things. And right now, her mom couldn't breathe. "She's upstairs, but she doesn't like people helping. She says help always costs too much." Ethan swallowed hard, fighting the sharp edge of guilt. "I promise it won't cost her anything. Please, let me make sure she's safe." The girl studied him, weighing trust with a wisdom far older than 6. Then she nodded and slipped her tiny hand into his. Her palm was cold but determined. Together they turned down Orchard Street, past shuttered storefronts and graffiti-stained doors, toward a tenement building with a faded red entry. The stairs inside smelled of damp plaster and boiled cabbage. The banister wobbled under Ethan's grip as they climbed. Apartment 3B waited behind a scarred wooden door with peeling paint. Ivy tapped lightly, then pushed it open. The air inside was stale, tinged with the metallic scent of illness. On a thin mattress against the wall lay Claire. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, labored waves. The sound was wet, rattling. Her lips were pale, almost blue. For the first time in years, Ethan Hartley's carefully ordered world slipped out from under him. He stood frozen in the dim room, one hand still holding the photograph, the other wrapped around the fingers of the child who had just changed everything. The building at 145 Orchard Street had a red door that remembered too many winters. Paint peeled in scallops, revealing older coats like rings on a felled tree. Inside, the stairwell was narrow, the kind that made neighbors turn sideways to pass. It smelled faintly of damp plaster and old cabbage, a tenement's honest perfume. Ivy climbed ahead with the small, careful steps of a child who knows which boards groan and which banister spindles wobble. Ethan followed, every creak underfoot amplifying the thud of his pulse. "Third floor, 3B, Ivy said, glancing back as if afraid he might vanish in the dim light. "The elevator's always broken, but we're used to stairs." He wanted to say, "You shouldn't have to be." He wanted to say, "I should have been here." Instead, he said, "You lead." "I'm right behind you." At the landing, Ivy fished a key from the pocket of her puffer coat, then paused, listening. From the other side of the door came a wet, shallow cough, a sound like a paper bag being crumpled in slow motion. Ivy's small knuckles rapped twice. She pushed the door with her hip. The apartment was one long room interrupted by ingenuity. A curtain on a tension rod carved a bedroom from the living area. A thrifted bookshelf served as a partial wall. Heat hissed weakly from a radiator in the corner. A single window let in a gray light that felt more like a memory of sun than the thing itself. On the kitchen counter, a chipped mug, an open box of saltines, a plastic pitcher half filled with water. On the round table by the window sat a spiral notebook with a blue cover, and beside it, a finger-smudged pulse oximeter. Claire lay on a mattress behind the curtain, propped on pillows, her breaths shallow and fast. Her face, oh God, that face, was still the map he remembered, only paler now, the lips edged with a dusk of cyanosis. A fine mist of sweat shimmered at her temples. Her hair had come loose from a clip and spilled across the pillow like a dark question. "Mom?" Ivy's voice was a tiny bell. "I brought someone. He gave me money, but I didn't sell him all the candy." Claire's eyes opened, finding shapes, then faces. They snagged on Ethan and widened with recognition that was less a welcome and more a wound reopening. She struggled to sit straighter and coughed. The sound was rattling, productive. She reached blindly for the tissue box and pressed a square to her lips. "Claire," Ethan said softly, stepping closer but keeping his hands at his sides. "It's me. I can see that." Even hoarse, her voice carried an iron filament. "You need to leave. I'm worried about your breathing." He kept his tone even, the way he'd learned to speak to panicked founders and angry investors. "Ivy said last night was bad." "We manage," Claire said. Her glance jolted to her daughter. "Ivy, kitchen, water." Ivy skittered to the counter, poured carefully from the pitcher into the chipped mug, then carried it back in both hands like a ceremony. Ethan watched her, the efficiency born of necessity. A child who knows where the towels are kept, which cupboard hides the good scissors, where the flashlight is when the power goes out. "Who told you to bring him?" Claire asked, not taking the mug. "Nobody told me." Ivy set the water on the crate they'd turned into a bedside table. "He asked nice, and he knew about selling double." "Selling?" Claire closed her eyes briefly, then opened them toward Ethan with an abrupt steadiness. "We don't take charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's triage." On the table, the spiral notebook beckoned. "May I?" he asked. Claire's mouth pressed thin, but she nodded once. Ethan flipped it open and found a neat grid of dates and times, a column labeled Meds, another BPHR, another SPO2, and notes in tidy pen. Furosemide 40 mg PO bid, metoprolol succinate 50 mg daily, spironolactone 25 mg daily, last refill 3 weeks ago, dry weight 118 Selby orthopnea. Paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea last night. The handwriting was careful enough to steady him and terrifying enough to sweep the floor out again. "I see you're tracking well," he said, meaning it. "These are the right agents for HFREF," Claire cut in, almost amused at his clinical diction. "You still talk like a white paper. I have heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, Ethan. I'm not allergic to the name." He met her gaze. "What's your EF?" "Last echo? 25%. Her breath shortened. "I take my meds, I weigh, I sleep propped up. And I keep the sodium down, though God knows the bodega thinks everything needs a salt lick." He reached for the pulse oximeter and held it up. "May I?" "Save your theatrics," she said. But when Ivy offered Claire's finger with a small, pleading look, Claire relented. Ethan slipped the device on. They waited for numbers to settle. SPO2, 88%. HR, 112. He felt the reading like a knock on the sternum. "Claire, this is dangerous. You're hypoxic. You need IV diuretics, maybe BiPAP, at least monitoring in an ER." "You mean I need a bill I can't pay?" she said. "And a stranger making decisions I didn't consent to." "I'm not a stranger." It came out rougher than he intended. "But you are," she said. No malice in it, just a bleak fact. 7 years is a long time. Ivy's eyes flicked between them with a child's radar for adult weather. "Mom, he's nice. He bought the candy, but he let me sell it again." Claire's mouth quirked in spite of herself. "A capitalist Samaritan." Ethan took a breath. "Claire, I know you want autonomy. I respect that. I also know pulmonary edema when I hear it. You're teetering. You think I haven't ridden this edge before?" She coughed again. The tissue came away pink-tinged. That small stain narrowed his world to a pinhole. He set the notebook down and crouched closer, palms open. "Leave me out of the equation if you need to. But don't leave Ivy without a mother because pride kept you from dialing 3 numbers. The room went quiet except for the hiss of the radiator and the ghostly gurgle of Claire's breath. Ethan took in the rest of the space, The thrifted nebulizer mask hanging from a hook, the brown pharmacy bottle with a child-proof cap too worn to be safe, the insurance notice half tucked under the toaster. Eligibility lapsed, premium past due. He felt the old reflex rise. Fix the system, buy the solution, bulldoze the obstacle. The part of him that wins deals wanted to pull out his phone, call a concierge physician, summon a private ambulance with lights that didn't flash. But another part, the part that had listened to Ivy on the sidewalk, knew that the question here was not only medical but moral. Who decides, and how? "Give me the nebulizer," he said, "and the albuterol if you have it." Claire eyed him, then nodded at the hook. He checked the tubing, found a vial, and moved with the crisp memory of EMT training he'd taken in his 20s because his father had made him. "If you can't lead, you'd better learn to follow," his father had said, "and following begins with learning to serve." He fit the mask and turned the machine on. Its hum filled the small room. The first breaths were shallow, then deeper, but the effort still carved furrows between Claire's brows. He set his phone on the crate and opened the voice memo app, forming a time-stamped log, habit wrapped around worry. "Claire Monroe, age 35, he said under his breath. "Known HFrEF, likely acute on chronic decompensation. SpO2 88 on room air, tachycardic, productive cough, possible pink froth. Meds noted, furosemide, metoprolol, spironolactone. Concerns, pulmonary edema versus pneumonia. Recommending ER transport. Patient hesitant due to financial and autonomy concerns." Claire shot him a look that was half disbelief, half reluctant gratitude. "Still documenting your life, Hartley?" "Documenting yours," he said. She pulled the mask aside. "Don't do this. Don't come in here and turn my sickness into your project." "I'm trying not to," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be the call that got answered." They held each other's gaze for 3 long heartbeats, a lifetime compressed into the space of a cheap curtain and a humming machine. Then Claire sagged, tired more than stubborn. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Ivy, sweetheart, get my purse." Ivy ran to the hook by the door, grabbed a canvas bag with a faded tulip. Claire removed an old insurance card, a photo ID, a folded sheet with her last discharge summary, the edges soft with rereading. She handed them to Ethan like a reluctant peace offering. "Fine," she said. "If we go because I say so. No heroics, no press, no." Ethan spectacle. "You have my word," he said. "And if I say stop at any point, you're in charge." She nodded, breath catching. "Then call." He dialed. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was practiced calm. "This is Ethan Hartley at 145 Orchard Street, apartment 3B, he said, steadying his own voice with the scaffolding of facts. "Female, mid-30s, known heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, acute shortness of breath, hypoxic at 88% on room air, tachycardic, wet cough, possible hemoptysis, conscious-oriented but in respiratory distress. We need FDNY EMS." As he spoke, Claire looked at Ivy, then back at him. The edges of her fear softened, replaced by something like resignation's gentler cousin, acceptance. Ivy slipped her small hand into her mother's and then into Ethan's, bridging them with fingers sticky from candy and life. "Stay with us until they come?" Ivy asked. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said. They waited in the thin light of the window, the red door at the end of the hall guarding the stairwell, the nebulizer humming like a stubborn hive, the city beyond oblivious and faithful as ever. Somewhere below, sirens began their distant thread through traffic, tugging help nearer. Ethan glanced at the spiral notebook again and made himself a silent promise that felt as binding as oath. No more unanswered messages. No more vanished years. The sirens grew louder. Claire's chest rose, fell. Ivy's grip tightened. And in the small apartment that had learned to make space from scarcity, 3 people practiced breathing together until help climbed the stairs. The ambulance screamed down Amsterdam Avenue, sirens braiding with morning traffic, red lights reflecting off glass towers. Inside, Ethan sat wedged on the narrow bench beside the gurney, watching Claire fight for each breath. Her oxygen mask fogged with rapid exhalations, chest heaving against the straps. Ivy clung to her mother's hand, her small body trembling with the vibration of the vehicle. SpO2 86 dropping, the paramedic called out, adjusting the BiPAP mask they had strapped to Claire's face. Crackles bilateral, rails all over. Suspect acute pulmonary edema. IV lines in, Lasix 40 pushed. Claire stirred, tried to lift the mask, but the paramedic pressed it gently back. Breathe with the machine, ma'am. Let it help you. Ethan's training in finance had taught him to process chaos in numbers, but here the metrics came in breaths per minute. Liters per minute, O2 saturation. He felt utterly powerless. No balance sheet could stabilize a failing ventricle. His only leverage was presence. When the ambulance doors flew open at New York Presbyterian Columbia's emergency department, a team in Navy scrubs met them. Claire was rolled through sliding doors under fluorescent lights, the words around her clinical and urgent. HFrEF, pulmonary edema, possible pneumonia, chest X-ray, BNP, troponin, blood cultures. Ethan moved to follow, but a nurse held him back. Family only. He glanced at Ivy, who pressed her face into his coat. "She's my mom," Ivy whispered, voice muffled. The nurse knelt. "Sweetheart, you can come. We'll take care of her." Then her eyes flicked to Ethan. "And you are?" Ethan's reply caught in his throat. Not husband, not listed contact, not legal anything. "I'm a friend," he managed. The nurse gave a professional nod. "Wait here. The attending physician will update you." The red line on the linoleum might as well have been a wall of glass. Ethan stood rooted, watching as the gurney disappeared through swinging doors, Ivy trotting alongside, tiny hand locked in her mother's. He felt the familiar ache of powerlessness, the same ache he had buried under deals and decimal points. Minutes stretched. The waiting room hummed with televisions tuned to muted news, vending machines buzzing faintly. When Ivy reappeared, escorted by a social worker in a tan cardigan, she was pale but calm. "Your mom's with the doctors now," the social worker said gently. "They're giving her strong medicines to help her heart and lungs. She'll be in the ICU soon." She turned to Ethan. "Are you her legal guardian?" Ethan shook his head. "No. He swallowed. "I need to be." HIPAA regulations require a legal next of kin or healthcare proxy, the social worker explained. "Since Claire is conscious but unstable, we can only release limited information. Do you know if she's married, divorced, any paperwork filed?" "No," Ethan said, his voice rough. "I don't, but I need to help her. I need to make sure she gets what she needs." The social worker studied him for a beat, then said carefully, "In New York State, emergency surrogate consent can sometimes be granted if there is no available spouse or parent, especially when a child is the only other relative and too young. The attending can call in legal counsel for a temporary order, but it's a process." "Then call them," Ethan said. "I'll pay whatever filing fees, whatever retainer. Just do it." Before the social worker could answer, a physician in a white coat approached, badge reading Dr. H. Patel, cardiology fellow. She spoke briskly, eyes scanning between Ivy and Ethan. "Ms. Monroe is in acute decompensated heart failure. SpO2 dropped to 86% on room air. Chest X-ray shows pulmonary congestion with bilateral infiltrates, likely pneumonia on top of volume overload. BNP is markedly elevated. We're running IV diuretics and broad-spectrum antibiotics. She's responding, but she's high risk. She paused. We need someone to sign consent for invasive monitoring. Possibly intubation if she deteriorates. Ethan gestured helplessly. Her daughter's 6. She can't sign. Dr. Patel frowned. Then we'll need the surrogate process initiated. She glanced at Ivy, then at Ethan again. Are you the father? The question hit him like an arrow. His answer, truth wrapped in uncertainty, hovered at his lips. But before he could speak, Ivy looked up with a child's blunt honesty. He might be. He bought my candy. Dr. Patel blinked. The social worker hid a smile behind professional composure. Ethan knelt, met Ivy's eyes, and said softly, We'll figure it out, Ivy. Right now, let's just help your mom. The social worker excused herself to phone the hospital's on-call legal counsel. Ethan remained by Ivy's side, fingers clenched on the edge of the chair, every muscle taut with the knowledge that time was medicine and bureaucracy was poison. When Dr. Patel returned, her tone was calmer. She's stabilized for now, on BiPAP, oxygenation improving, Lasix infusion running. We'll admit her to the cardiac ICU. Relief came like a breaking wave. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Then Ivy whispered, Can we see her? In a moment, Dr. Patel said kindly. But only for a little while. She needs rest. As they walked down the hall toward the ICU, Ethan's mind churned. The whiteboards scrawled with patient initials, the constant beeping of monitors, the smell of antiseptic, all felt like a battlefield where the enemy was invisible and relentless. He thought of quarterly reports, of investor calls, of decisions measured in millions. None of it weighed as much as this. A pulse line flickering across a screen. At the ICU doorway, Claire lay connected to monitors, a mask hissing softly as it delivered pressurized air. Her eyelids fluttered open as they approached. She looked at Ivy first, then at Ethan. And a flicker of recognition, fatigue, and something else passed across her face. Her voice was muffled but audible. You stayed. Yes, Ethan said, his throat tight. I'm here. Claire's gaze lingered, suspicious but softer than before. Don't make promises. I'm not, he said. I'm just telling you where I am. Ivy climbed onto the chair, pressed her small hand against her mother's. Mom, he called the people. They came. They gave you air. Claire's lips quirked, a fragile smile. She shut her eyes, surrendering to the machine's rhythm. Ethan stood, silent, while the monitors ticked on. And somewhere inside him, a decision hardened like steel. No more waiting behind red lines. If laws and proxies stood in the way, then he would bend them. If his own company's shadows had once erased her voice, then he would pull every string to make sure she was never unheard again. Night in the cardiac ICU has its own weather. Lights dim but never darken. Alarms chirp like distant birds that never sleep. The air carries the tang of chlorhexidine and warmed oxygen. Behind glass doors, Claire drifted in and out, tethered to monitors that translated her heart's stubborn labor into luminous green squiggles. The BiPAP mask had been changed for high-flow nasal cannula. Her breaths were longer now, the terrible rattle fading to a damp whisper. Every so often a nurse would slip in, silently efficient, to chart, to tuck, to check the IV pump delivering the furosemide drip that had already coaxed liters of fluid from her lungs. In the family lounge, Ivy built a city out of plastic blocks, the kind hospitals keep in a bin that smells faintly of hand sanitizer. Her city had 2 bridges and 1 red door. She pressed the blocks together with the concentration of a watchmaker. Across from her, Ethan watched with a patience he had learned in markets and was relearning here, how to hold still while the essential thing takes the time it needs. A woman in a slate blue lanyard approached, carrying a folder and the gentle authority of someone who has walked families to the edge and back. "Mr. Hartley, I'm Maria Sanchez, MSW, the unit social worker." She offered a hand. Her grip was warm. "I've been assigned to Ms. Monroe's case." "Thank you for coming," Ethan said, standing. "How is she?" "Medically, the team's encouraged. The diuresis is doing its job. She's still high risk for the next 48 hours, but the trajectory is better." Maria glanced down at Ivy's bridge. "That's beautiful. Is this where your mom lives?" Ivy considered. "This is where we live now." She nudged a blue block toward Ethan. "This one is his." Maria smiled. She sat, smoothing her skirt. "I'm here to support your family with non-medical needs, housing, benefits, school coordination, counseling, and," she looked at Ethan, "navigating HIPAA and healthcare proxy questions. I know legal is working on an emergency surrogate order so someone can sign if Claire becomes unable." "I appreciate it," Ethan said. "For now, she's awake and deciding?" "She is," Maria confirmed. "Which brings me to a delicate point. Miss Monroe requested to see Ivy, and only Ivy, this morning." The words were a small incision he felt anyway. "Of course," he said, steadying the disappointment before it could reach the child. He crouched by Ivy. "Your mom wants a little visit, just you and her. Do you want to go with Ms. Sanchez?" Ivy searched his face. "You won't leave?" "I'll be right here," he said. "I'll guard the bridges." She nodded, slipped her hand into Maria's, and the two disappeared down the hall, past a series of doors where lives were being stitched back to themselves. Left alone, Ethan sank into the chair. He knew this move, the protective perimeter Claire was drawing. He couldn't blame her. Trust, once broken by silence and years, didn't return because a man showed up with money and intentions. It returned, if at all, by keeping vigil when there's nothing to buy and nowhere to go. He walked to the window that faced the river, a dark ribbon under the city's sharpened lights. On another floor, a code alarm sounded, not theirs, then faded into routine. He checked his phone out of reflex, silenced an investor message, and texted the only thing he could think to send to the number he'd been given for the nurse's station. "No questions. Just tell her Ivy is safe and I'm nearby." When Ivy returned 20 minutes later, her eyes were shiny in the way that doesn't mean tears exactly, just an overflow of feeling. She climbed back to the chair and rearranged the block bridges, adding a second red door. "She said I can come back later," Ivy reported. "She said you should get some rest." Ivy wrinkled her nose as if the suggestion were absurd for either of them. Maria sat again, folder open now. 2 practical items. First, housing. The unit has access to emergency housing vouchers through a partnership with the Department of Social Services and a nonprofit called ShelterLink NYC. Given Claire's medical status and the safety concerns in your current tenement, stairs, unreliable heat, it might qualify you for a short-term hotel placement near the hospital with a pathway to transitional housing. Would that help? Ivy looked relieved without knowing why. Ethan exhaled. "It would, but only if Claire wants it." Maria nodded. "Second, benefits in school. Ivy is enrolled at PS 20 Anna Silver, correct?" At Ivy's nod, she continued, "We can coordinate with the school counselor for a temporary attendance accommodation and facilitate transportation assistance. Also, I'll screen for SNAP and Medicaid recertification when Claire is ready. Her last eligibility letter shows a lapse. We can expedite a hospital financial assistance application in parallel. Ethan said, I'll cover co-pays, deductibles. Maria lifted a hand gently. That's generous, but eligibility for assistance should be assessed independently of your support. It protects Claire's patient rights and avoids conflicts of interest. Donors are welcome. Systems still matter. He met her eyes with something like respect. So we build the bridge both ways. That's the work, Maria said. We keep people from falling while we teach the river a gentler path. A nurse poked her head in. Ms. Sanchez, Ms. Monroe's asking for you. Then to Ethan, Mr. Hartley, would you step down to registration when you have a minute? We need emergency contacts and an address for Ivy if she stays overnight. I'll go now, he said. He ruffled Ivy's hair. Guard the bridges. At the registration desk, he provided what he could. His number, his office, the temporary apartment on East 74th Street his foundation used for family respite stays. He signed the visitor confidentiality form and initialed a non-disclosure addendum the hospital had quietly slid across the counter. Someone had recognized his name, and to their credit, they protected patients from headlines. New York had long memories and quick cameras. When he returned, he found Maria in a quiet corner near the ICU, her voice low, her posture attentive. Claire was awake, propped higher, mask, cannula hissing. Maria had the tone of someone drawing a map with the person who has to walk it. And you decide who sees you and when, Maria was saying. We can set visitation boundaries in your chart. You can name primary contact and proxy. You can change your mind later. Control is part of care. Claire noticed Ethan and dipped her eyes. Not quite a nod, not quite a dismissal. He stayed at the threshold, palms visible, a guest at the door of his own history. Ms. Monroe, Maria asked, Ivy mentioned your building's heat goes out. Would you consider the voucher placement until you're discharged? It would include a meals stipend, laundry vouchers, and a case manager who can meet you at bedside to plan discharge goals, cardiac rehab, med reconciliation, home safety. Vouchers, Claire murmured. I've lived on vouchers that expired before the month did. These don't fix everything, Maria said. They fix this week. And next week? Claire's mouth bent at the hard part. I don't want my daughter learning to be grateful for crumbs. Ethan finally spoke, each word measured. Then don't take crumbs. Take footing. Let us build the next part on something that doesn't collapse when you step on it. Claire's gaze tightened. Us, she repeated, as if tasting a foreign spice. You keep saying us. I'm trying to learn how to say you first, he answered, and to say it without a price tag. For a moment, no one spoke. The monitors clicked. Down the hall, a transport team rattled by with an empty bed, its wheels singing the ICU's peculiar lullaby. Ivy, who had been quiet in the doorway, padded forward and set a candy bar on Claire's tray, one of the hand-wrapped squares, red yarn knotted carefully. Only one, Ivy said. Because sodium. Claire's laugh, fragile and astonished, broke on the inhale. She wiped at her eyes with the cuff of her gown. Traitor. Maria's smile reached all the way up. I'll initiate the voucher request, she said, standing. I'll also place an order for inpatient counseling. Grief, stress, adjustment. It's standard of care. You get to say yes or no. Put it in, Claire said. I can always say no later. Noted. Maria squeezed her shoulder. I'll be back with paperwork you control. When they were alone, Claire shifted her gaze to Ethan. I meant it when I said I didn't want help that costs too much. I heard you, he said. Help cost me a 7-year silence once, she continued, voice steadying. A man in a suit decided my emails were a distraction to your deal calendar. Suddenly it wasn't just you who was busy, it was the world. He swallowed. I found logs. I'm not asking you to absolve me. I am asking you to let me pay attention now. Claire looked at the ceiling tile, speckled like winter sky. Attention is expensive in your world. It's the only currency that matters here, he said. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath that sounded more human and less haunted than any she'd taken since the ambulance. For Ivy, she said at last. If the voucher means she sleeps warm and gets to school without 2 bus transfers, then yes. But on my chart, you'll tell them, primary contact, Claire Monroe. Secondary, Maria Sanchez, MSW. You can be tertiary if you like fancy Latin. His smile was small, grateful, and properly chastened. Tertius it is. And visiting hours, she added, opening one eye. He can come when Ivy's here, otherwise he needs permission. Logged, Maria said, reappearing as if conjured by policy. She had a pink form and a pen. Sign here to formalize visitation parameters. Initial here to accept housing placement, and here to allow us to share limited updates with Mr. Hartley when Ivy is present. Claire signed, slow but decisive. Her hand trembled. Ethan pretended not to see. Ivy climbed onto the chair and rested her head against Claire's arm, careful of wires. Mom, she whispered, can we be a team? Claire cupped her daughter's cheek. We already are. Ivy turned to Ethan. Then you're on our team too, but Mom is the coach. Finally, Ethan said, smiling, a competent chain of command. The afternoon thinned. A technician came to draw labs, a respiratory therapist adjusted flow rates, a volunteer left a blanket soft as a promise. Paperwork moved through unseen channels. By early evening, Maria returned with a keycard on a lanyard. Shelter link placement confirmed, she said. Midtown Hotel, 2 beds, bus pass, meal stipend loaded. I'll escort Ivy there tonight and bring her back in the morning before school. Mr. Hartley, you're welcome to meet us in the lobby and then step back. Let Ivy settle. Understood, he said. He turned to Claire. Do you need anything from the apartment? Just the notebook, she said, then reconsidered. And the photo, the one Ivy carries. I'll bring both, he said. Claire studied him a moment longer, then looked away, not unkindly. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. It was unmistakably a plank laid across water. Ethan felt the strange gratitude that arrives when a door remains closed but not locked. As the unit lights shifted from afternoon to ever evening, Ivy hugged her mother and left with Maria, small hand wrapped around the new keycard like a talisman. Ethan walked to the threshold and paused. Claire met his eyes. Thank you, she said. The words landed like coins in a jar that had been empty too long. Small, bright, undeniably real. I'll be back with the notebook, he replied. And Ethan? Her voice was quiet. Yes. Next time, knock. He nodded, the lesson plain. I will. He stepped into the corridor, where the ICU breathed its mechanical lullaby, and felt, against all arithmetic, the first stable vital sign of the day. Trust, faint but present, beginning to perfuse. The Midtown Hotel voucher lasted only 3 nights. On the morning of the 4th, Maria Sanchez met Ethan in the lobby with a quiet nod. We'll need a longer bridge than vouchers, she said, slipping a paper across the table. I've pushed through a referral to a short-term lease program sponsored by nonprofits and private donors. But to qualify, a family must have a documented medical hardship. Ms. Monroe qualifies. The placement is on East 74th Street, Upper East Side. 2 bedrooms, ground floor, ADA compliant. Ethan read the document, then folded it carefully. I'll underwrite the rent through the Hartley Foundation, anonymously if possible. Maria tilted her head. Anonymity is rare currency. But if that's what Claire accepts, we'll frame it as foundation aid, not personal. That evening, Ivy unlocked the door to the East 74th apartment with the solemn excitement of someone entrusted with a crown jewel. The space was modest. Scuffed hardwood floors, white walls, a narrow galley kitchen that smelled faintly of fresh paint. But compared to the Orchard Street tenement, it felt like a cathedral. "There's heat," Ivy whispered, rushing to the radiator and pressing her cheek against it. "And no stairs." She flung open a cabinet. "And space for soup." Her eyes sparkled in a way that tightened Ethan's throat. He followed her to the kitchen, setting down a bag of groceries he had carried himself: celery, carrots, an onion, a whole chicken, parsley, bay leaves. "What's all this?" Ivy asked. "Soup," Ethan said. "My mother's recipe. She swore chicken soup is better medicine than half the pharmacy. I thought your mom could use some." Ivy bounced on her toes. "I can help." He found himself tying an apron around her waist. Guiding her hands as she chopped carrots with exaggerated care, her small fingers curled under the way he demonstrated. He taught her to listen for the sizzle of onions hitting the pot, the sound like applause. Soon the apartment filled with a fragrance that softened every edge, savory, earthy, healing. When the broth was simmering, Ethan ladled a container to take to the hospital. Ivy insisted on tying the lid herself, looping a rubber band 3 times. "So it won't spill on Mom," she explained. At the ICU, Claire was propped up with a book she hadn't turned a page of. When Ethan entered with the container, she raised an eyebrow. "Bribery by poultry?" "Soup," he said simply, setting it on the tray. "Family recipe." The nurse sniffed approvingly. "That smells better than the cafeteria. I'll warm it." Claire's lips pressed into a line that was not quite disapproval, not quite surrender. She watched as Ivy perched on the chair, babbling about the new apartment. "2 bedrooms, Mom, and the radiator sings, and we made soup, real soup." Claire's gaze drifted to Ethan, then back to her daughter. "Soup, huh?" "His mom's recipe," Ivy said proudly, "and I chopped the carrots." For a moment, Claire's expression softened. Then, like a tide turning, her eyes sharpened. "Why now, Ethan? 7 years of silence, and suddenly you're making broth?" Ethan sat, unflinching. "Because I only just discovered why there was silence. I thought you'd chosen to disappear, that you wanted nothing more to do with me. But last week I recovered an archived email log from our servers. Messages you sent were intercepted by my own assistant. She was ordered to screen my personal communications." Claire's breath hitched, more from anger than weakness. "Ordered by who?" "Graham Aldridge," Ethan said. "My COO at the time. He told her to filter distractions, his word. That included you. Every message you sent after March of that year was blocked. I never knew you were pregnant. I never knew you tried." Claire's hand trembled against the bed rail. "You expect me to believe your empire lost track of an entire human being because of an assistant?" Ethan reached into his briefcase and laid out printed logs. Headers, timestamps, the assistant's initials in metadata. "I don't expect belief. I'm showing you proof. I was blind, but I wasn't indifferent." The room went very quiet. Monitors hummed. Soup simmered in the warmer. Claire's eyes filled, then flashed. 7 years, she whispered. "Do you know how many nights I held Ivy through fevers, through rent notices, through hunger, thinking you had chosen absence?" "I can only imagine," Ethan said, voice breaking. "And that imagining is what will haunt me. I can't erase it. I can only stand here and not leave again." Ivy's small voice broke the silence. "Mom, he didn't know. And he made soup. Claire barked a laugh through tears. Soup as evidence. Ivy, you're impossible. Soup is proof, Ivy said solemnly, hugging the container to her chest. Claire shook her head, tears slipping freely now. She turned away, ashamed of both her anger and her relief. Get out, she whispered hoarsely. Not forever. Just for now. I need space. Ethan rose slowly. I'll give you space, but I'll be nearby. He stepped into the corridor, the smell of chicken and parsley trailing like a promise. Behind him, Claire held the container, her tears falling onto the warm lid. For the first time in 7 years, she allowed herself to believe, just barely, that the silence might not have been abandonment, but theft. And that realization hurt more than any betrayal, because it hinted at something more dangerous than anger. Hope. Morning light slanted across Midtown, catching the mirrored facade of Hartley Capital's tower on 6th Avenue. From street level, it looked like any other monument to money, steel, glass, and relentless ambition. But inside, the air carried a new weight. The night before, Ethan had barely slept. Images of Claire's trembling hands on the soup container haunted him, alongside the digital logs that still glowed on his laptop. Now, seated at his corner office desk, Ethan stared at the name Graham Aldridge printed across a board agenda memo. 7 years ago, Aldridge had been his second-in-command, the COO who handled distractions so Ethan could pursue billion-dollar SPAC mergers. That phrase had once felt like loyalty. Now it tasted like betrayal. A knock on the frosted glass door announced his general counsel, Megan Lee, a sharp-eyed attorney who had cut her teeth in securities law. She carried a slim folder. We finished the metadata analysis, Megan said. The emails Claire Monroe sent between March and June 7 years ago were intercepted at the exchange server level. The IT logs show Aldridge ordered your assistant to apply a custom rule. Any incoming message from her address was diverted to a hidden archive. She laid down screenshots, server paths, timestamps, an internal memo flagged confidential. Ethan's jaw tightened. So it's undeniable. He erased her voice. More than that, Megan said. He weaponized silence. By filtering personal correspondence, he altered not only your private life but your fiduciary judgment. That SPAC deal closed in June. If the board learns he manipulated your focus, they will, Ethan cut in, because I'm going to tell them. Megan blinked. Ethan, disclosure will hit the stock like a hammer. We're already under SEC scrutiny after last quarter's volatility. If you reveal Aldridge's interference, investors will see leadership instability. Are you prepared for that? He turned to the window. Central Park was a muted quilt of brown and gray in winter's grip. For 7 years, a child grew up without her father because of what he did. If I stay silent now, I'm complicit. Megan studied him, then nodded. Then we'll need documentation airtight. I'll draft a memorandum to the board, language that protects Claire and Ivy from exposure, but makes clear this was corporate malfeasance, not a personal scandal. Do it, Ethan said. Schedule an emergency board session. By afternoon, the boardroom at Hartley Capital buzzed with contained unease. Mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, city skyline beyond. Graham Aldridge sat opposite Ethan, his silver hair immaculately combed, his cufflinks catching the light. To anyone else, he radiated control. But Ethan, watching closely, saw the flicker in his eyes, calculation under pressure. Gentlemen, ladies, Ethan began, voice steady. Before we review quarterly numbers, I have a disclosure. He slid a stack of documents across the table. 7 years ago, personal correspondence addressed to me was deliberately intercepted and concealed. This action was authorized by COO Graham Aldridge. The justification given was to shield leadership focus during merger negotiations, The effect was not only a breach of privacy, but a manipulation of my judgment. We have verified server logs and metadata. Murmurs rippled. A board member, Patricia Collins, leaned forward. Are you alleging corporate fraud? I'm alleging obstruction, Ethan said. Interference with the decision-making process of the CEO. That's breach of fiduciary duty. And it damaged not only personal lives, but the moral foundation of this firm. Aldridge spread his hands, calm as a lawyer. Let's not dramatize. This was risk management. At the time, Ethan was stretched thin. My priority was preserving the SPAC. Filtering emotional distractions ensured shareholder value. Emotional distractions? Ethan's voice cut like glass. You mean a woman carrying my child. You mean the difference between family and abandonment. You decided I didn't need to know. A silence thickened. Someone's pen clattered to the table. Patricia Collins cleared her throat. Mr. Aldridge, this is indefensible. Even if framed as efficiency, intercepting personal communications violates ethical boundaries. We are trustees of capital, yes, but also of trust. Another director added, if this leaks to the press, we face reputational collapse. We must act. Ethan stood. I won't bury it. Transparency is the only way through. Suspend him, launch an independent investigation, issue a disclosure to investors. If the stock dips, so be it. Better a dip than rot. The vote was swift. Aldridge suspended pending investigation. His face, taut with rage, betrayed the first crack in years. As he left the boardroom, he leaned close to Ethan, voice low. You think confession will save you? Markets punish weakness, and when the dust settles, you'll learn that honesty doesn't buy loyalty. Ethan held his gaze. Neither does betrayal. That night, back in his East 74th kitchen, Ethan washed carrots for another pot of soup. The small apartment smelled of thyme and simmering broth. Ivy sat at the table, crayons scattered, drawing a house with 3 stick figures inside. One was labeled Mom, one Me, and the third, hesitant letters, Dad? Ethan's hands stilled on the cutting board. Claire, discharged for a trial of outpatient therapy, sat nearby with her spiral notebook open, recording weight and blood pressure. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. You look tired, she said. It was a board day, he admitted. And I told them the truth, he said. I exposed Aldridge. He's suspended. There'll be fallout, but at least the silence isn't on my hands anymore. Claire studied him for a long beat. You chose transparency over stability. That's not like you. Maybe I'm changing, Ethan said quietly. Or maybe you finally saw the cost of silence. The soup bubbled. Ivy lifted her drawing, proud and unguarded. Look, Mom, I made us a family. Claire's throat worked. She traced the letters with her finger, then folded the page and tucked it into her notebook. Her expression was complicated. Gratitude, fear, the ache of possibility. Ethan set bowls on the table. Steam rose, mingling with the faint hum of the radiator. For the first time in years, the air around them felt less like fracture and more like fragile repair. The clinic on East 70th Street smelled faintly of disinfectant and printer ink, the two universal scents of outpatient medicine. Posters lined the waiting room wall. Know the signs of heart failure, vaccinate on time, pediatric checkups save lives. For Ivy, the words were background noise. She was too busy flipping through a coloring book the nurse had given her. Claire sat stiffly in the chair beside her daughter, spiral notebook open on her lap, blood pressure from that morning carefully recorded, 94/62, HR 108, weight 117.0. Her hand trembled faintly, the pen pausing in midair as if it might write something else, something she had kept unsent for years. Folded inside the back pocket of that notebook was a letter she had drafted countless times but never mailed. Its first line had always begun the same. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage. Now, Ethan himself sat across the small exam room, hands clasped, eyes steady. He had insisted on joining the appointment, not as a CEO, not as a benefactor, but as someone trying to belong. Dr. Karen Wallace, a cardiologist with kind eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses, scanned Claire's chart. Claire, your vitals are stable for now, but the heart failure remains advanced. We'll monitor, adjust diuretics, and schedule a repeat echocardiogram. Now, about care coordination. Do you have a healthcare proxy in place? Claire shook her head. Not yet. Dr. Wallace glanced between them. Then we'll need to address guardianship questions, particularly for Ivy. Insurance, school enrollment, even parental consent for future procedures. At the word guardianship, Ivy's coloring paused. She looked up, her hazel eyes wide. Does that mean Dad? The word landed in the room like a dropped stone in still water. Silence rippled outward. Claire's breath caught. Ethan leaned forward, his voice gentle. It might, if your mom agrees. Dr. Wallace folded her hands. A paternity test would resolve legal standing quickly. We can do a buccal swab, simple cheek cells. Results are highly accurate. Once confirmed, Ethan could be added to medical and legal documents as a joint guardian. Claire's lips tightened, caught between fear and relief. And if I say no? Dr. Wallace's tone stayed professional but firm. Then Ivy remains legally in limbo. If anything happens to you, decisions about her care could fall to the state. I recommend clarity, for her sake. The choice hovered like a blade. Claire looked at Ivy, who now clutched her crayons to her chest as if they were lifelines. Finally, Claire exhaled. Fine, we'll do it. The nurse returned with a swab kit, sealed and sterile. She explained the steps with cheerful precision. Quick swipe inside the cheek, a little scrape, then into the vial. That's it. Ivy climbed onto the exam chair, swung her legs nervously. Does it hurt? Not at all, the nurse said. Like brushing your teeth without toothpaste. Ethan knelt beside her, eye level. I'll do mine first, so you see. He let the nurse swab his cheek, dropping the cotton tip into a vial labeled with a barcode. He grinned at Ivy. See? Easy. Ivy giggled, then opened her mouth wide. Ah! The nurse swabbed her gently. When the vial clicked shut, Ivy clapped her hands. Done! Claire's eyes shimmered with something unspoken. She reached into her notebook, fingers brushing that unsent letter. Instead of pulling it out, she took the pen and wrote the date beside the entry. DNA swab, Ivy plus Ethan. 3 weeks later, Ethan was back in the East 74th kitchen when his phone rang. The caller ID read Dr. Wallace. His chest tightened. Yes? The results are in, Dr. Wallace said. Her tone softened by years of delivering truths. Paternity is confirmed, 99.99%. Ethan, Ivy is your biological daughter. He gripped the counter as the words washed over him. Numbers, probabilities, things he had spent a career quantifying now pointed to something no ledger could hold. Fatherhood, undeniable, written in blood and code. That evening, Ethan carried the sealed report to the apartment. Ivy was at the table again, drawing, her crayons now scattered across half-finished pictures of bridges and hearts. Claire sat by the window, notebook open, the unsent letter folded flat beneath it. Ethan handed Claire the envelope. She opened it with deliberate calm, scanned the numbers, then set it down. No outburst, no tears, just a long, trembling breath. Ivy tilted her head. What does it say? Claire hesitated. Ethan crouched beside his daughter. "It says, 'I'm your dad.'" The words seemed to glow in the air. Ivy blinked, then launched herself into his arms with a squeal. "I have a dad!" He held her, the force of her small embrace breaking something wide open in his chest. His eyes burned. Claire looked away, pressing her hand over her mouth, but her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Ivy pulled back just enough to study him. "So you're dad now. Does that mean you can make pancakes?" Ethan laughed through tears. "I'll learn." She hugged him again, fiercer. "I don't care about pancakes, I just care you're here." Claire finally spoke, her voice raw. She's waited her whole life to say that word. Ethan met her gaze. "So have I." For a long moment, the three of them stayed bound in silence. The small vial of blood and the unsent letter, both unnecessary now, their truths already etched in the heartbeat of a child who had drawn a family before the law caught up. The courthouse on Center Street rose like a fortress, its marble columns weathered by decades of pleas and verdicts. Inside, the family court waiting area buzzed with tired parents, restless children, and the low murmur of attorneys negotiating compromises before a judge ever lifted a gavel. Ethan sat on a wooden bench, suit pressed but nerves frayed. Beside him, Ivy swung her legs, clutching a folder of crayons. Claire, pale but steady, leaned against her cane. Her LVAD surgery was still weeks away. Until then, each step was a deliberate act of defiance against her failing heart. Their attorney, Daniel Price, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses and a quick mind, reviewed the file one more time. "The petition is straightforward," he said. "Joint medical guardianship for Ivy. This allows both of you, Claire and Ethan, to sign for care, school, and emergencies. It also ensures continuity if Claire's health worsens. Normally, this would be uncontested, but..." Claire's eyes narrowed. "But..." Daniel hesitated. "Aldridge has filed an objection, claiming Ethan is unfit due to conflicts of interest and potential undue influence on the mother. He attached tabloid clippings suggesting you're being manipulated for financial gain." Claire's jaw tightened. "Of course he did." Ethan rubbed his temples. "He's trying to salvage his reputation by dragging us through mud." Daniel nodded. "The judge will hear it. We'll counter with medical necessity, DNA results, and social worker testimony. Stay calm. The judge is known for cutting through theatrics." Inside the courtroom, Judge Ellen Markowitz presided with sharp eyes and a voice honed by years of untangling messy truths. The room smelled faintly of paper and old wood. "Case number 23 FC 112, the clerk intoned. "Petition for joint medical guardianship of minor Ivy Monroe." Claire stood, one hand braced on the table. Ethan rose beside her. Ivy clutched her crayons tighter. Judge Markowitz glanced over her glasses. "I see paternity has been established by DNA testing. That simplifies one matter. Mr. Hartley, Ms. Monroe, your petition requests joint authority over Ivy's medical and educational decisions. On what grounds is there objection?" Aldridge's attorney, a smooth man in a tailored gray suit, rose. "Your Honor, Mr. Aldridge submits that Mr. Hartley's involvement is not in the child's best interest. He has a fiduciary empire to protect. His reappearance coincides conveniently with Ms. Monroe's illness. We suggest his motives are more financial than paternal. To that end, Ms. Monroe is being exploited." Claire's cheeks flushed with fury. "Exploited? I've raised Ivy alone for 6 years. Do you think I'd hand her to anyone I didn't trust?" The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Monroe, you'll have your turn. Counsel, do you have evidence of this alleged exploitation?" The lawyer waved a printout. Tabloid headlines, grainy photos of Ethan leaving the hospital. Public perception matters, Your Honor. If Ms. Monroe dies, Ivy could be thrust into scandal. That is not in the best interest of the child. Judge Markowitz's expression didn't flicker. Tabloids are not evidence. Do you have affidavits, reports, or testimony? The lawyer faltered. At present, no. Daniel Price stood, calm but firm. Your Honor, we submit the DNA results confirming Mr. Hartley's paternity. We have testimony from Maria Sanchez, MSW, the hospital social worker, attesting to his role in Ivy's care. We have medical documentation of Ms. Monroe's condition requiring immediate support. And, he glanced at Ivy, we also have a statement from the child herself. The judge tilted her head. From the child? Yes, Your Honor. Ivy has prepared a drawing she wishes to submit. At Daniel's nod, Ivy slid off her chair, walked shyly to the bench, and handed the judge a page of construction paper. On it was a crayon house with 3 figures, one labeled Mom, one me, and one Dad. Above them, in shaky letters, Home. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Markowitz studied the drawing, then looked over her glasses at the little girl. Ivy, did you make this? Yes, ma'am, Ivy whispered. It's our family. I don't want to pick just one. I want both. The judge softened almost imperceptibly. She handed the drawing back with care. Thank you, Ivy. That was very brave. Turning to counsel, she said, I have no patience for smear tactics. The best interest of the child is clear. Petition for joint guardianship is granted. Ms. Monroe and Mr. Hartley will hold equal authority. I'll also order a review by Family Services in 6 months to ensure stability. Court is adjourned. Her gavel fell, crisp as a heartbeat. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed, reporters hungry for scandal. Ethan shielded Ivy with his coat, ushering her and Claire into the marble corridor. Claire's face was pale but resolute. You see what he's doing? She hissed. Aldridge will keep coming. He doesn't care about us. He wants you ruined. Then we stand taller, Ethan said. Truth beat him today. It'll beat him tomorrow. Ivy tugged Claire's sleeve. Mom, we won, right? Claire crouched, wincing at her chest but managing a smile. Yes, sweetheart, we won. You told the truth and the judge listened. Ivy beamed. So we're official now? Like on paper? Ethan knelt beside her. Yes, Ivy. On paper and in here. He tapped his chest. She threw her arms around both of them at once, her crayons spilling across the marble floor. Claire leaned into the hug, eyes closed, letting herself rest, if only for a moment, in the fragile certainty of family recognized not just by love, but by law. The morning of the operation dawned clear, a rare winter sky rinsed of clouds. From the 13th floor of New York Presbyterian, the city looked deceptively calm, yellow cabs inching through traffic, the Hudson glinting steel blue. Inside the hospital, however, every breath carried urgency. Claire Monroe was prepped for surgery, her gown tied at the back, her hair tucked under a paper cap. Tubes trailed from her arms. Monitors traced each fragile beat. Today, the surgical team would implant a left ventricular assist device, LVAD, a mechanical pump that would take over for her failing heart, buying her years of life and perhaps a bridge to transplant. Ethan stood at her bedside, Ivy perched on his hip. Claire's hazel eyes were steady, but beneath the calm lay a storm. I thought I'd be terrified, she whispered, but I'm oddly peaceful. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Peace is earned, Claire. You've carried fear long enough. She smiled faintly. Don't make speeches. Just promise you'll be here when I wake. I promise, he said. And Ethan? Yes? Don't let Ivy see me like this. Remember, her world doesn't need more machines than it already has. Ivy protested. But I want to stay with Mom. Claire cupped her daughter's cheek. You'll see me soon, sweetheart. Stronger. But for now, you stay with Dad, okay? Ivy nodded reluctantly, clutching the stuffed rabbit a nurse had given her. As the surgical team wheeled Claire away, Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Megan Lee, General Counsel. Board in crisis. Stock plummeting 12% after leak. Need immediate authorization for interim leadership. Press waiting. Call now. His chest tightened. Aldridge again, leaking news of the family court hearing, spinning it as corporate instability. Investors were spooked, millions evaporating by the minute. Ethan stared at the double doors that had just swallowed Claire. He had built Hartley Capital on control. Control of numbers, markets, outcomes. But here, control meant nothing. What mattered was presence. He typed back, Authorize CFO, interim, no statements, family first. In the surgical theater, Dr. Patel led the team with calm precision. TTE confirms severely reduced EF. Will proceed with sternotomy and implant. Terms flew in rapid sequence. Heparin bolus, cannulation, driveline exit site, TEE guidance. Stainless steel glinted under bright lights as the LVAD took shape like a second heart waiting to breathe. Outside, Ethan sat with Ivy in the family waiting room, his arm around her small shoulders. Every so often, a nurse would emerge with an update. Stable under anesthesia. Cardiopulmonary bypass initiated. Device placement in progress. Each fragment was both lifeline and torment. Hours passed. Investors called, journalists emailed, but Ethan silenced them all. His empire could bleed for one day if it meant standing guard for this one woman and the child who had taught him what empire really meant. At last, Dr. Patel emerged, mask pulled down, eyes tired but triumphant. The LVAD is in, functioning beautifully, flows are stable, map holding, oxygenation excellent. She's in ICU for recovery. But the hardest part is behind us. Ivy squealed and clapped, tears springing to her eyes. Ethan's vision blurred as he exhaled a prayer he hadn't realized he was holding. When Claire woke, her chest ached as though a storm had passed through and left metal in its wake. The rhythmic hum of the LVAD filled the room, steady, mechanical, oddly comforting. She blinked and saw Ethan in the chair, Ivy curled against him, both asleep, their heads touching. She tried to speak, but the ventilator tube had already been removed. Her throat rasped dry. Still, the sound stirred Ethan awake. He rose instantly, leaning over, his eyes shining. "You made it," he whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "I hear something." "The LVAD," he explained. "It's your new teammate." She let out a shaky laugh. "Sounds like a radiator." "A very expensive radiator," he said, and she smiled, weak but genuine. Ivy stirred, then gasped. "Mom, you're awake!" She scrambled to the bedside, careful of the wires. "You promised you'd come back." "And I did," Claire whispered, kissing her daughter's hair. The next day, while Claire rested, Ethan faced the board via secure video link. The directors' faces flickered across the screen, anxious, impatient, some openly hostile. "Mr. Hartley," Patricia Collins began, "the market is in freefall. We cannot afford your absence. Either you return immediately, or we consider succession permanent." Ethan took a breath. feeling the weight of the choice. He thought of Claire's scar, of Ivy's drawing with the word home above 3 figures. He thought of Aldridge's voice warning that honesty doesn't buy loyalty. Then consider it permanent, Ethan said. My place is here. If the company can't survive transparency and integrity, then it doesn't deserve to survive. Appoint the CFO. I resign as interim CEO effective today. The directors erupted. Shock, anger, disbelief. But Ethan closed the laptop with a steady hand. For the first time in years, the numbers were no longer his master. That evening, in the quiet of the ICU, Ethan sat by Claire's bed. She was stronger now, color returning to her cheeks, LVAD humming a rhythm like a metronome of second chances. I stepped down, he told her softly. Her eyes widened. You what? I resigned. To be here. With you. With Ivy. She stared at him, torn between disbelief and something warmer. You gave up billions. I gave up noise, he said. I chose the only balance sheet that matters. The 3 of us. Claire's eyes filled, but she smiled. You always did have a dramatic streak. Only when it counts, he replied. Ivy climbed onto the bed, nestling between them, her tiny arms linking them together. Promise we'll stay like this, she said. Ethan pressed his hand over hers. We promise. The 3 of us. The LVAD hummed in steady time, like a furnace warming the room. For the first time, they felt not fractured, not threatened by silence or scandal, but bound by a promise stronger than profit, to choose each other, every day, heartbeat by heartbeat. Winter melted into a tentative spring, and with it came slow but steady healing. Claire's LVAD hummed faithfully, a quiet rhythm beneath her ribs, while her days were marked by cardiac rehab sessions and evenings filled with Ivy's chatter about school and crayons. Ethan, no longer tethered to boardrooms and earnings calls, found his hours reshaped by the cadence of family. Clinic appointments, bedtime stories, soup simmering on the stove. The apartment on East 74th had served them well through the hardest weeks, but the walls seemed to shrink around Ivy's drawings taped to every surface, her block towers sprawling across the floor. One evening, as Claire practiced her breathing exercises on the balcony, Ethan stood beside her, gazing westward where the tops of buildings glowed gold in the setting sun. Come with me tomorrow, he said softly. There's a place I want you to see. The next afternoon, he led Claire and Ivy to a pre-war building on Central Park West. Its stone facade was worn with elegance, iron balconies curling like lace. The doorman greeted them warmly. No cameras, no fuss, just familiarity born of quiet arrangements. Inside, sunlight spilled across parquet floors. Wide windows framed the park, its trees newly green, joggers moving like brushstrokes across the paths. The space wasn't vast by Billionaire standards, but it carried something Ethan had never owned before: warmth without spectacle. Ivy ran through the rooms, her laughter echoing. Look, you can see the horses and the boats. She pressed her nose to the glass, leaving tiny smudges. Claire stood still, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the windowsill. Ethan, what is this? A lease, he said. Long-term, affordable by foundation standards. Not a penthouse, not an empire, just a home. For you, for Ivy, for us, if you'll allow it. Her eyes filled, and for a moment she looked away, watching her daughter trace hearts on the fogged window pane. I don't need chandeliers, Ethan. I need honesty. He nodded. Then honesty. I want to build a life here. Not grand gestures, just presence. One day at a time. That night, The three of them shared their first meal in the new kitchen. Plain pasta with tomato sauce, garlic bread Ivy helped toast. On the table between them, Ivy placed a jar filled with the last few peanut butter fudge candies she had once sold on Orchard Street. She untied the red yarn and set the candies free in the jar like treasures finally at rest. "When I sold these," Ivy said solemnly, "it was to save Mom. Now I want them to be for eating, together." Claire covered her daughter's hand, tears slipping unchecked. Ethan added his hand on top, the three palms stacked like a vow. Later, when Ivy was asleep under her new quilt, Claire and Ethan sat on the balcony, Central Park spread below them like a living painting. The LVAD whirred in the quiet, steady as a metronome. "I used to think survival was enough," Claire whispered. "Paying the bills, getting through each night, breathing into the next morning. But sitting here, I want more than survival. I want living." "You deserve it," Ethan said. "So do you," she answered. "For all your billions, you never had this. A table, a child's laughter, soup on the stove. It's ordinary, but it's the only wealth that matters." He turned to her, eyes wet but steady. "Then let's keep choosing it. Every day, ordinary as extraordinary." She smiled, leaning against him carefully, her strength returning one heartbeat at a time. Weeks later, Hartley Capital's board moved on without him. The headlines quieted, Aldridge faded into irrelevance under investigation, and the markets forgot. But in the small kitchen overlooking Central Park, the legacy Ethan began was not measured in share prices. He established the Hartley Cardio Fund, dedicated to supporting single parents with advanced heart failure, offering grants for housing, rehab, and child care. The first press release ended with a line Ethan insisted on. "No child should ever have to sell candy on the street to keep a parent alive." Claire framed the clipping and hung it in the hallway. Every time Ivy passed it on her way to school, she tapped it like a lucky charm. On a warm evening in early summer, the three of them gathered for dinner on the balcony. Ivy set the jar of candies in the middle of the table, its red yarn bow tied neatly. "Today," she announced, "these aren't for selling. They're for celebrating, because we're a team." They each unwrapped one piece. The fudge melted sweet and salty on their tongues, a taste of the past redeemed. Claire laughed, her cheeks flushed with color. Ethan raised his glass of water. "To truth, to trust, and to us." Ivy clinked her juice cup with solemnity. "And to soup, always soup." They laughed until the sound carried out over Central Park, blending with the hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves. For the first time in years, Claire felt not just alive, but present. Ethan, no longer a man split between power and absence, felt whole. And Ivy, the girl who once stood on Orchard Street with a cardboard sign, now sat between her parents, glowing with the certainty that she had built a family with nothing more than candy, courage, and hope. The LVAD ticked its steady rhythm, not as a reminder of fragility, but as a furnace in the chest, a lo sioi, warming a home that had finally learned what it meant to be healed. Thank you for staying with us until the very last chapter of this journey of love, healing, and second chances. Claire, Ethan, and Ivy remind us that family is not built on wealth or perfection, but on truth, presence, and the courage to begin again. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and join us for more stories of hope and transformation. Together, let's keep building a world where compassion is the greatest fortune.